Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I only get to do this poem once a year, so thanks for listening. We'll make it a tradition. But this is not the Thanksgiving that we celebrate. Pumpkin pies, turkey, green bean casserole, small children tracing their fingers on construction paper and turning them into a turkey dressed as a pilgrim or an Indian. But this is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. No, this is the Thanksgiving we celebrate. This, right here, right now. This is what we have to be thankful for. It's why we call it Thanksgiving. This is it. There's not an official date for the now trending Friendsgiving. For me, that is you. You watching this broadcast. You are my friends. You watching this broadcast are my family. You are here, and for you, I give thanks. And forget all that leftist diatribe. Yes, I too have been to Plymouth Rock and protested on Thanksgiving too. And it has taken me a long while to embrace and celebrate Thanksgiving, but I do. Because do you know what language the natives spoke in 1621 when they first laid eyes on the Pilgrims? English. Thank you, Squantum. A name that should be spoken at every Thanksgiving, but is not. You see, the Wampanoag had been trading with Europeans for a century by the time the Pilgrims got there, and the Pilgrims had never heard a word of Wampanoag in their life. There were, in fact, more native people living in North America that had been to Europe than Europeans in North America. It's true. Less than 10 years after Columbus's voyage, the first dozen Native Americans, not that they would have called themselves that, from what we now call New England, were off visiting Europe and learning European languages. Granted, this was not a sightseeing trip that they chose to make like the Pilgrims did, and few would return. By the 1600s, native slaves were the chief component of America's gross national product, North and South, and largely due to the Spanish, but that's a different story. In 1605, English Captain John Weymouth returned to Europe with a payload of 20 Indians chained in his cargo, and among those Indians was Squantum, the very Indian that first approached the starving Pilgrims. He managed to return to New England as a part of the cargo of Captain John Smith, yes, that John Smith, in 1614 on Smith's first voyage. However, members of Smith's crew had other ideas. And Squantum was again sold into slavery, but freed by friars in Spain because he declared himself Catholic, and then was educated, at least by the ways of Europeans, and brought back as a guide and interpreter in 1619. He had actually hung out in London as an English-speaking free person. But this is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. Understand that when the Pilgrims arrived in the 1620s, which, in case you hadn't noticed, is very cold in New England, things were not going well already. Poor piloting had wasted precious time, and it was now late in the year, and that first winter was not pretty, and the Pilgrims were starving. They spent their first few weeks surviving by sending out armed parties that stumbled into the remains of an Indian village that had been abandoned, largely because of disease that was already running rampant and decimating the native population. And they broke into homes and stole stashes of food that had been left there. Survival. But that is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. Even after the Plymouth colony had a good year under their belt, the Pilgrims were not doing so well, and neither were the Wampanoag. They were in a state of war with the Narragansett, and the Pilgrims had something the Wampanoag could use. Guns. Squantum and friends show up saying, "You guys look pretty hungry. Maybe you should eat some of these pumpkins we raised." They also suggested maybe you should get over that weird religious aversion to shellfish and eat some of these lobsters. We got plenty of those running around on the beaches. And while you're at it, those guns you got, we could use a few of those. The Pequot are really starting to piss us off. Yes, my friends, the first Thanksgiving was indeed an arms deal. But still, that is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. And so began a series of pacts, alliances, allegiance, and affirmations that always seemed up with the Europeans on top. We all know this shit. Anyone who has ever watched the History Channel for more than an hour knows this. But still, I say, Happy Thanksgiving. For that is not the Thanksgiving we celebrate. I like to think of Thanksgiving as a pagan ritual where we celebrate the bounty of this life, give thanks for all that we have got. And frankly, we do have a lot. My favorite Thanksgiving is the one I do celebrate. It took place when I was living in Canada, where they don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Okay, they do, but on a different day and for different reasons. But anyway, I was living as a street musician in a tourist town in the early 90s. Living in a shack in a lumber yard with my wife, Amanda Stark. We were a duo. We called ourselves Stark Raving Chandler, paying literally $100 a month Canadian to live there with a wood stove. Things were bleak. I mean, compared to the first winter spent by the Pilgrims, I had it pretty good. But when viewed through the rose-colored Ray-Bans of today's standards, that little wood-burning stove did not work very well. Bad weather in a tourist town meant no money for a big meal, and we were hungry. And I know you think Canada is a socialist country and all, so I could have gotten some assistance, but no, I was a frostback. An undocumented U.S. American worker working for below standard wages to entertain the tourist class. In short, no Thanksgiving for Chandler. But my friends, a miracle transpired. The Canadian Postal Service. Because they don't celebrate Thanksgiving on the same day that we do, they deliver the mail on the fourth Thursday of November. And my mother timed it perfectly. She was distraught by the fact that I was living in a land with no Thanksgiving, so she mailed me a can of turkey meat, a box of stovetop stuffing, a can of cranberry sauce, and a can of green beans and cream of mushroom soup, and a can of those French fried onions that are only good for one thing, Thanksgiving. Holy moly, that was the best Thanksgiving I ever had. We do have a lot to be thankful for, and why not be that? Thankful. Happy Thanksgiving. That is the Thanksgiving that we celebrate. Thank you for listening. We'll do this again next Thanksgiving, but till then, happy Thanksgiving.